It's good. It's a good book. I recently finally got around to reading Atlas Shrugged, my first Ayn Rand book, I will actually like to say, and I enjoyed it. It did not convert me to the one true faith of objectivism, but I did enjoy it. Now, you might be surprised to hear that I, a libertarian, have never read Ayn Rand, seeing as how, if you ask anyone who's not familiar with libertarianism, they will assume that Ayn Rand is, I think, the Pope of libertarianism, or was. We've got a dead Pope. But anyway, Ayn Rand was not a libertarian by her own words. If you use the word libertarian broadly enough, I suppose Ayn Rand may fit into it, because she is in favor of free markets and capitalism and individualism, private property rights, that sort of thing. But Ayn Rand herself differentiated from libertarians to the extent that she, quote, said, "Libertarians are a monstrous, disgusting bunch of people. They plagiarize my ideas when that fits their purpose, and they denounce me in more vicious manner than any communist publication when that fits their purpose. They are lower than any pragmatists, and what they hold against objectivism is morality. They'd like to have an amoral political program." So Ayn Rand was no fan of libertarians. She had her own philosophy called objectivism. That being said, the common conception that she's the introduction to libertarianism is actually somewhat accurate, at least in effect. Walter Block, Brian Kaplan, many prominent libertarians have cited Ayn Rand as their introduction to libertarian ideas. So whatever she might say, the effect she has had has been to some degree to push people towards libertarianism, and so therefore one might think that as an introductory libertarian book in some ways, I wouldn't get too much out of it, having been a libertarian already. But I was wrong. Objectivism does have its own unique insights, and not all of them are wrong, despite the fact that I have become a libertarian a while back, and despite the fact that this book has not converted me to objectivism instead. I do think that a lot of the common criticisms are invalid, that they're at least incomplete, and I also think that there's a lot of really good stuff in there, so I would recommend that anyone read that book. I'm going to get into some spoilerish stuff. I'm going to read some quotes from the book in this video, so if you're really sensitive to spoilers, don't watch ahead. That being said, I am also going to make sure that the quotes I read won't spoil the main parts of the story. It's not going to give away too much in the way of major plot points. It would still be worth reading after you have seen this video. So if you do watch the video before reading the book, still go read the book. All right. But moving on to the common criticisms of Ayn Rand that I think don't quite work. The first one is probably the most common, and that is that the writing is too overtly political. That she's not writing in sort of from the heart, that she's just trying to get her clear message across and just using her characters as a tool to do it. And that makes it not an authentic piece of art in some way. And I think someone who has espoused this rather succinctly was Jordan Peterson, and I'm going to play a little bit from Jordan Peterson, an interview with Dave Rubin, talking about that exact criticism of Ayn Rand and expounding it a little bit.
The artist shouldn't be able exactly to say what he or she is doing. If you can say what you're doing, you're not producing art. Art is, well, you could say art bears the same relationship to culture that the dream does to mental stability. You know, your dream doesn't say what it's about, it just is. You can interpret it, and that's helpful sometimes, just like movie criticism is helpful. But the dream is something that extends you beyond where you already are. That's why it isn't verbal thought, it's something else. It's like a pseudopod that's going out into the unknown. That's what art is. And the artist who subsumes the artistic vision to the ideological framework is putting the cart before the horse. It's actually a sin, I would say. It's like the ultimate in creative sins to do that, because you're harnessing the greater to the lesser. It's like, yeah, you understand things, and you could tell a story about what you understand. It's like, no, you tell a story about what you don't understand, and then you pull everyone into the story. The story's an exploration in that way. And so, you know, that's why I don't really think that Ayn Rand qualifies as literature. I liked her books. I got into them, you know, but she knew what she was saying.
And that is the criticism, that she knew what she was saying. That might have some validity in it. I'm not saying that nothing Jordan Peterson is saying there is, thought-provoking or even insightful in some ways, but on the whole, the criticism is at the very least incomplete. And the reason I say that is because if you're critiquing a work, and in that very work itself, there is a preemptive response to the criticism that you're making, I think it's incumbent upon you to at least respond to that preemptive rebuke of your exact criticism that is in the work itself. I think that is kind of a minimum necessity for a criticism to be complete. Right? That you have to respond to the exact rebuke that was in the work, and there is such a rebuke in Atlas Shrugged. I'm going to read it out in just a moment. It's from a composer, a character in the story, who talks about why he likes businessmen and industrialists more than most artists. Not because he doesn't love art, but because he thinks that businessmen and industrialists tend to have the right attitude about doing things more than artists do, and that a lot of artists are just garbage because they don't think. And without further ado, let me read the response in its entirety. Have you heard the moralists and the art lovers of the centuries talk about the artist's intransigent devotion to the pursuit of truth? Name me a greater example of such devotion than the act of a man who says that the earth does turn, or the act of a man who says that an alloy of steel and copper has certain properties which enable it to do certain things, that it is and does. And let the world rack him or ruin him, he will not bear false witness to the evidence of his mind. This, Miss Taggart, this sort of spirit, courage, and love for truth, as against a sloppy bum who goes around proudly assuring you that he has almost reached the perfection of a lunatic, because he's an artist who hasn't the faintest idea what his art is or means. He's not restrained by such crude concepts as being or meaning. He's the vehicle of higher mysteries. He doesn't know how he created his work or why. It just came out of him, spontaneously, like vomit out of a drunkard. He did not think. He would not stoop to thinking. He just felt it. All he has to do is feel. He feels the flabby, loose-mouthed, shifty-eyed, drooling, shivering, uncongealed bastard. Which I like, as you can tell. But yes, so there is, in the work itself, a rebuke of that common criticism. And I don't know, if you're going to make that criticism, you at least have to contend with Ayn Rand's preemptive response, which I think, on the whole, I buy. I do think that intention and clarity are positive things about a piece of art. It seems controversial, but I really liked that about Ayn Rand's work. Okay, so the next criticism that I want to talk about is, well, people will say that the philosophy itself, the one being propounded, is, well, garbage. This is the way people talk about it. And I certainly have my own criticisms of it, but the main one that people bring up is the one that I had before I read the book, the virtue of selfishness and the vice or the evil of altruism. It's something that Ayn Rand talks about a lot. I mean, how could selfishness be a virtue and altruism be evil? Isn't that almost an oxymoron? What could morality mean if not giving of yourself to others? Well, there is a much stronger case for it than you might think. And it's probably going to become a little bit more obvious as I get to some of the other things Ayn Rand has said and some other good arguments she's made. But let me just start off by putting it to you this way. Do you at least think that the expectation of altruism is maybe not evil, but bad in some way, potentially fraught with problems? If I expect you to sacrifice your well-being for mine, that seems like it might have something wrong with it. You might even call it selfish by the common usage of that word. But let's think about it for a little bit more, because if you agree that my expecting you to sacrifice yourself for me, if that's clearly something wrong, right? If there's, or at least potentially something wrong, then potentially my indulging that is just aiding and abetting someone who is being immoral. If you expect me to do good for you, and thereby sacrifice myself, then you're doing something wrong, at least potentially. And by indulging that, I'm helping someone do something wrong. And furthermore, by sacrificing myself for you, even if you don't expect it, aren't I teaching you to expect it? Right? Aren't I, by sacrificing of myself, teaching you, like giving you the idea that that's the correct way to get things, to expect others to provide them for you? Maybe. And that's a large theme in Atlas Shrugged, right? That it's the people who do work and do produce, giving of themselves to others, and how maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe what they're doing is creating a dependency, an expectation of someone to just bail them out of their problems if they're just too lazy or just incompetent to get anything done and produce for themselves. Maybe it's those who produce who are teaching those people to just expect to be supported. And really the ones who are doing something wrong, the real source of the evil there, are the productive people not expecting others to be productive as well. I don't know. That's not getting all the way, of course, to either Ayn Rand's idea. I mean, I'm just sort of pushing towards Ayn Rand's idea. That isn't exactly it. And it also isn't getting all the way to virtue, selfishness being a virtue, and all the way to selflessness being evil. But it does point out some ways in which maybe it's not as oxymoronic and clearly wrong as you might have thought at first. So that was the first thing, actually, that I really liked about Atlas Shrugged. Well, probably the second thing. The first thing that I really found that I liked was just the capitalists being the good guys. How many times have we seen a story where, you see a rich guy in a story, right? Just statistically speaking, do you think he's a good guy? Well, you've got one really poor guy and one really rich guy in the story. Who's going to be the sympathetic character here? The poor guy or the rich guy? Pretty much always it's the poor guy's the sympathetic character, the rich guy's the bad guy, the mustache-twirling capitalist who's just out for his own profit and thereby harms everyone somehow. That is a common story we see. And it's really good because in reality, as a good libertarian, I'm sure you're aware, that's not how it works. Those who become rich, at least if they do so via, market transactions and not by, becoming a mafia or joining the government, but I repeat myself, those people who get rich through the market system are actually the good guys most of the time. They're producing a lot of wealth for a lot of people. Not to say that they're always good people, but at least insofar as they are becoming rich, they're producing wealth. They're doing something good. So it's good to see the right people portrayed as the good guys for once. Anyway, beyond that, which is something that I knew I'd get from the story and is why I read it in the first place, beyond that, I also want to talk about some of the other philosophical merit of Atlas Shrugged. And one thing is how she utterly destroys the commonly held Marxist creed of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. I think a lot of people think that slogan, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, that sounds nice. There's a story that a bum tells in Atlas Shrugged. Not the sloppy bum from earlier, totally unrelated, but a bum. He used to work for a motor company that went under, but before it went under, it was trying to basically turn itself into a commune, right? They instituted that slogan, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And when they instituted that, there was the way that Atlas Shrugged describes that situation, just the degeneration morally of the culture whilst using that principle. It really gives a new perspective to me. I really liked how it was put. I'm just going to read just the first section to give you a taste of how how she describes, or how he, the character, describes this degeneration. So here we go. Do you know how it worked, that plan, and what it did to people? Try pouring water into a tank where there's a pipe at the bottom, draining it out faster than you can pour it. And each bucket you bring breaks that pipe an inch wider. And the harder you work, the more is demanded of you. And you stand slinging buckets 40 hours a week, then 48, then 56, for your neighbour's supper, for his wife's operation, for his child's measles, for his mother's wheelchair, for his uncle's shirt, for his nephew's schooling, for the baby next door, for the baby to be born, for anyone anywhere around you. It's theirs to receive, from diapers to dentures, and yours to work. From sun up to sun down, month after month, year after year, with nothing to show for it but your sweat, with nothing in sight for you but their pleasure, for the whole of your life, without rest, without hope, without end. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. We're all one big family, they told us. We're all in this together. But you don't all stand working in a acetylene torch 10 hours a day together. And you don't all get a bellyache together. What's whose ability, and which of whose needs comes first? When it's all one pot, you can't let any man decide what his own needs are, can you? If you did, he might claim that he needs a yacht. And if his feelings is all you have to go by, he might prove it, too. Why not? If it's not right for me to own a car until I've worked myself into a hospital ward, earning a car for every loafer and every naked savage on earth, why can't he demand a yacht from me, too, if I still have the ability to not have collapsed? No? He can't? Then why can he demand that I go without cream for my coffee until he's replastered his living room? Oh well. Well, anyway, it was decided that nobody had the right to judge his own need or ability. We voted on it. Yes, ma'am. We voted on it in a public meeting twice a year. How else could it be done? Do you care to think what would happen at such a meeting? It took us just one meeting to discover that we had become beggars. Rotten, whining, snivelling beggars, all of us, because no man could claim his pay as his rightful earning. He had no rights and no earnings. His work didn't belong to him, it belonged to the family. And they owed him nothing in return, and the only claim he had on them was his need. So he had to beg in public for relief from his needs, like any lousy moocher, listing his troubles and miseries down to his patched drawers and his wife's head colds, hoping that the family would throw him the alms. He had to claim miseries, because it's miseries, not work, that had become the coin of the realm. So it turned into a contest among 6,000 panhandlers, each claiming that his need was worse than his brother's. How else could it be done? Do you care to guess what happened? What sort of men kept quiet, feeling shame, and what sort got away with the jackpot? But that wasn't all. There was something else that we discovered at the same meeting. The factory's production had fallen by 40% in that first half year, so it was decided that somebody hadn't delivered according to his ability. Who? How would you tell it? The family voted on that too. They voted which men were the best. And these men were sentenced to work overtime each night for the next 6 months. Overtime without pay, because you weren't paid by tune and you weren't paid by work. Only by need. And that is all that I'm going to read about that one. But yeah, I hope that I'm not the only one who finds that really quite an engaging and immediate, visceral way of explaining the problem with that moral precept, that Marxist moral precept that I think a lot of libertarians have encountered. I think that kind of story coming from Ayn Rand, who lived through something similar in the Soviet Union, I think that's the only way you can really feel the utter abhorrence of the kind of ideas that libertarians advocate against. So in that sense, it is also worthwhile for even a seasoned libertarian to read Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. Okay. That being said, I do have some criticisms, and I'm going to go into 3 of them. The first criticism is she doesn't quite get all the way to the virtue of selfishness, nor the vice of altruism. You can totally see in the way that she describes the problems with altruism that there is definitely a problem with us not valuing the contribution a man makes to himself. Right? We should praise someone for producing, even or potentially especially if he does it for his own profit, because his own profit is a good measure of how he has benefited others, at least if he does it on a voluntary basis. But that's the thing, at least if he does it on a voluntary basis. She does have some explanations as to why you don't really get the benefit of cheating someone or stealing from someone to gain a profit, even though that would be selfish. She says that wouldn't be selfish when you cheat and steal. You're going to suffer because of that. People aren't going to like you for one thing. You're going to get punished for another thing. But more than that, you'll have some kind of a moral degradation which will eat away at you. And there's a few other layers that she goes into, but none of them can possibly apply across the board. There are definitely plenty of situations in which someone, is willing to bear the costs of, the potential of getting caught and the potential of the guilt eating away at him, or potentially doesn't feel that much guilt because the person he's robbing he just doesn't like, and will be incentivized in that situation to rob. And morality, I think, if it's any moral system worth its salt, is going to tell that guy who it is in his best interests to steal, cheat, kill, is going to tell him that that's the wrong thing. I think that any decent moral system is going to do that. And I don't think that objectivism convincingly does so. I don't think that in every conceivable situation it really is in people's best interests to play fair. I think there are exceptions. So that's my first criticism. I think that virtue of selfishness, vice of altruism, a little too far. I would actually prefer to say that selfishness, benefiting yourself is a positive thing, right? And that the problem that we have when we have that sort of worship of altruism, that worship of victimhood, right? That your need, because there's something wrong, that entitles you to things. The problem there is that we are forgetting that the actor himself is a person, right? And so my moral response to people who say, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, you should be altruistic and never selfish, is I think that there is a responsibility for you to not harm others. But if you do something to benefit yourself, that's still a positive moral thing, right? You should, in your moral calculation, you should consider your own benefit. If you do something that harms no one, but helps you, I think that that's a good thing. You've made the world a better place, because I think that everyone's values being fulfilled is a positive thing, and that includes you. It includes the person taking the action. So I would say that that's my softer and less extreme move in that direction that Ayn Rand went, and I think it works better. Okay, my second problem with Ayn Rand is it kind of is an implicit utilitarianism, and I kind of think that pretty much all moral systems are. There's this underlying thing where, think of the story that Ayn Rand tells, right? She describes a situation in which, well, if we apply this principle, this moral principle consistently, look at how bad it is for everyone. But why is that convincing? Right? Why would it be convincing that applying this moral principle across the board results in bad outcomes, therefore we shouldn't do it? Well, that's consequentialism, right? That's utilitarianism. The greatest good for the greatest number, right? The thing doing the work there, the argument that is actually moving the person who you're talking to, is basically a utilitarian one. I think this is a trap that a lot of moral systems fall into, and personally, I choose to just embrace it, and I call myself the reasonable utilitarian, right? I go into this in another video, but I kind of embrace utilitarianism to some degree. I don't think that there's a way around it. I think that if you can describe a situation where the consequences for everyone are really bad, I think that's going to end up, by pretty much any moral system, is going to live or die on whether it considers that really bad outcome bad. If it doesn't, that's not going to be convincing. And Ayn Rand's own rhetoric shows this. Anyway, so that's number 2. Now the third one, and this is kind of the main one, is the is-ought gap. And, okay, so the is-ought gap is a concept brought up by David Hume, where he says that it's impossible to derive an ought, as something you ought to do this, from an is, something this is the case. And if you don't think that that's correct, try to do it. So you can say that, for example, I don't know, I am hungry, eating this food will sate my hunger, and therefore I should eat this food. That actually doesn't work, right? Because it has an implicit thing in there, in the premise that I should sate my hunger. Because if it's not true that I should sate my hunger, then that argument would not conclude that I should eat the food, right? So you have to put an ought in the argument already to get to an ought at the end. If you say, this food will sate my hunger if I eat it, and I ought to sate my hunger, therefore I should eat this food, that now does work. But it has an ought as a premise, and that's the thing. You can't get just a bunch of is statements and end up with an ought. You need an ought in there already, which just cuts the world into two, into is statements and ought statements, and you can't bridge from one to the other. You need to already have one in there before you can get to the other one. You know what I'm saying. So the point there is that Ayn Rand tries to jump from a series of is to an ought, and I don't think that she succeeds. I'll just read it out. Man's life is the standard of morality, but your life is its purpose. If existence on earth is your goal, you must choose your actions and values by the standard of that which is proper to man, for the purpose of preserving, fulfilling, and enjoying the irreplaceable value which is your life. So that is her attempt at getting from an ought to an is. An is to an ought. And if you read through more of the speech that it's from, which I don't want to do because that would be a spoiler, she essentially argues that it's contradictory to act for your own destruction, because you can only act because you're alive, and therefore those acts which are pro-life, or specifically pro-your life, are the rational ones to take. This has problems in several ways. It's true that you can only act for your own destruction once, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't, in that one situation, act for your own destruction. And there's a lot of situations in which people do. For example, you might shorten your lifespan by drinking some alcohol or eating some unhealthy food. That's acting for your own destruction, but nonetheless, it's for your enjoyment. Right? And we trade a little bit of our life for some enjoyment. In those situations, are you really going to say that we should never take those sorts of actions? It's acting for your own destruction after all. So I think that Ayn Rand in that sort of situation would say, that it's, part of your life, inherently of life of man, is his own enjoyment and his own fulfillment. But, that's now getting away from the initial argument that, you ought never act for your own destruction, right? That's now adding in additional things. So that's the problem that I have with Ayn Rand's arguments. I don't think that she gets from the is to the ought. I don't think that she quite proves the virtue of selfishness nor the evil of altruism. And I think that she doesn't get away from the ever-present utilitarianism in all moral arguments that I seem to hear. But I'm not entirely sure. I've only read this one book, and I'm relatively new to objectivism, and I would like to talk to some objectivists. So I have potentially got some people lined up, and I'm going to do some interviewing of those people, at least one of them, and I'll announce on Twitter when I'm going to be doing it, and I should be able to learn what objectivism is, what its relationship is to libertarianism. Is it, by any definition of libertarianism, a libertarian subcategory? I don't know, but we will see. So thanks everyone for watching. Go read Atlas Shrugged, and look out for the objectivist interview that I'll be doing soon. Bye.